And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us once again with a brand new guest, someone I followed in his work engaging, deconstructing Islam, really. Speaker's Corner in London and at many different conferences. And that is Bob of Speaker's Corner. Many of you will know him as Bob the Builder. Bob, thanks so much for giving us your time today.
Thank you for having us.
Great to have you on. And I want to unpack a lot. People can obviously find you. That is your handle on Twitter, on X. And I know you work closely with Soko Films, Soldier of Christ Online. And I want to discuss, there are lots of things to unpack, and we've had different guests on looking at specific parts of Islam. But I think the overall question is it confident Islam filling the vacuum left by weak, confused Christianity? I want to delve into that, but can I maybe ask you to just take a moment and introduce yourself before we jump into that?
Yeah, sure. I work as an evangelist here in London. A lot of my work is based at Speaker's Corner. I kind of continue the presence of Jay Smith, who did it there for 24 years. I work online and offline across London, across the country, supporting Christians, getting to grips with the questions around Islam, the church, and modernity, as well as helping develop polemics and apologetics to what could be described as the Dawa script, and helping Christians to engage with the issues, as well as to learn and to train them up to evangelize effectively Muslims.
Well, you certainly have a great knowledge, similar to Jay's, and also a voice similar to Jay's, which I guess you need that voice to carry whenever you're somewhere at Speaker's Corner in the middle of a park in London.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blessed. It's not as strong as it used to be when I first started, and I think that's probably because I got out of the habit of running. And I need to get back into the exercise. Plus, 6 years of having to shout my head off because of people heckling you, and having people shout in my ears have actually damaged my throat and my ears. So, but I keep going.
Well, thanks for giving us your voice today. Can I ask you, what is being a Christian evangelist? Kind of maybe just touch on that first. Is the focus, and many of your viewers will not necessarily be Christian, but they will call themselves cultural Christian. They like a lot of the ideals in Christianity, but they haven't met Christ. Many of them will be critical and concerned of the rise of Islam and the impact they are seeing in their local area, whether it's here in the UK or actually more influential in the States. But when you say Christian evangelist, your work is often deconstructing Islam. Where is the focus? Is the focus on taking down Islam, or is it about presenting Christ, or do those kind of combine?
The thing is, if all you do is take down Islam, then all you've done is knock something over. You've not offered an alternative. And so for me, the focus is actually more about presenting Christ. But very often when you're engaging with Muslims, they have this set series of arguments that you have to wade through first. And we need counters to those arguments. And very often some of the best counters to the arguments is to show how the same thing is true in Islam. So if their arguments are knocking down Christianity, their arguments are knocking down Islam. So for instance, Muslims will say that the Bible has been changed and it can't be trusted. So what do we do about the fact that there are multiple different versions of the Quran? How did those changes get there? The hadiths themselves have been changed, and thus how can we trust the hadiths? Muslims will often demand a level of proof that their own religion can't stand up to. So they'll say things like, show me where Jesus said that he is God in those very words. But yet there's many things that Muslims believe where they can't find the same level of evidence that they request of us. And so, it's about a good presentation of Christ involves a good critique of Islam. And whereas, Jay most recently has focused on what he thinks is a big right hook to follow his big left hook that him and Hatun put in together. I try to focus more on just jabs, because I recognize that most people in most contexts don't have the time to go into in-depth argument, and so they need small, quick to learn arguments that they can use in debate and discussion, and those are the ones that I try to educate Christians around.
Well, let's pick up, and the question is a confident Islam filling the vacuum left by a weak, confused Christianity? I guess the question is there a confidence in Islam, or do we, maybe looking at it from the outside in, do we mistake confidence? Do we mistake aggression for confidence, or forcefulness for knowing what they believe? I mean, we're told, it's absolutely solid, rock solid, blah, blah, blah. Is that the case? Is Islam confident, or should it be confident?
Well, I think we've got to be clear about our terms. Do we mean Islam, or do we mean Muslims? You see, the thing is, when it comes to Muslims, they've got momentum at the moment. Things are moving in their direction, and they are increasingly emboldened. And to sort of cut to the chase with regards to the whole question, it's not really that they're emboldened against a weak and confused Christianity. It's that they're emboldened against a weak and confused liberalism. And they're emboldened for lots of reasons that are sociological. And they're used to having the upper hand in everyday conversations about Christianity and Islam, because so many Christians are just poorly educated, unable to do debate. They don't know how to construct an argument. And the reason for that is something inherent within Islam, because Islam is a religion of law. It's part and parcel of a religion of law to debate the nuances of the law, which is what Muslims call fiqh, and they do this within madhabs or legal schools. And so there is a culture of debate that permeates throughout Islamic culture. Whereas, and you'll see it in the Jewish culture as well. Jews do the same as a community. They'll debate the finer points of Torah law and the involvement in it, or certainly the rabbis do. Whereas Christians, because our faith is not a religion of law, but one of ontology, and ontology and descriptions of ontology are much more about narrative.
What do you mean by ontology?
Being human. Okay. A way of being human. And so that's much more about narrative, and it's much more paradigmatic. And so all a Christian needs to do to understand how to live out their faith is to have a good understanding of the story and how that applies to their lives. And so Christians tend to be weaker in debate. But when you find Christians like myself, like Jay, like David, and like the other apologists like Sam Shamoon, David Wood, I meant David as in, David of Speaker's Corner, or David Lynn, or Chris of Speaker's Corner, or any of the evangelists that actually bother to learn how to debate. When we go up against the Muslims, you find that they crumble intellectually. But crumbling intellectually can be compensated for by other things. And Islam is much more conscious of sociological facts than many in the church are. And so, for instance, they're very deliberately going after celebrities and celebrity culture, because they know that if you go for the elites and you convert the elites, then the masses will follow. Whereas Christians have forgotten that truth, even though the church has a long history of doing that. And Muslims know that if they can capture, and when I say Muslims, I don't mean all Muslims, obviously, I mean the activist Muslims. So when I say Muslims, you should first assume that I'm talking about the activist community of Muslims, as opposed to just generically any Muslim you meet. But Muslims who, understand that if you can capture the courts, the police, and the political seats of power, it doesn't matter whether you lose the debate, because you can just take control of society. And that's, again, something that Christians have forgotten and they've neglected. And so there is forward momentum and there is a confidence, but it's not a confidence that can be unchallengeable. It's not a confidence that can't be beat, as it were. It's just that Christians are in poor shape.
No, completely. What is are Muslims generally taught? I mean, for the viewers and listeners, as they maybe engage with work colleagues and friends, you've got a dichotomy where Muslims are told that Christians are people of the book, but on the other side, that we have changed our scriptures, and then who Jesus is and whether he died. So there seem to be Muslims seem to be taught that you've got commonality with Christianity, but on the other side, there's some things that are wrong. And if you talk to a Muslim about Jesus being the Son of God, then you'll probably get a strong response to that. But what is it when you come across someone who calls themselves a Muslim, who understands a little bit of what they believe? Do they see Christians as a threat or as a brother?
I mean, you couldn't sort of generalize. I mean, there isn't one answer to that. It really depends upon the Muslim that you meet, and so there isn't an answer to that question. But certainly amongst the activist community of Muslims who are there to push Islam and to push Sharia law, they very much see Christians. Currently, they see Christians as the easy target, but they also see activist Christians who are pushing the other way as a threat. So it also depends upon the Christian. If you're a lame duck Christian who's not doing much for the kingdom of God, not doing much for the church, not particularly wanting to engage in challenging Islam, Muslims will, on the whole, be quite happy to pull out the familial and brotherly aspects of the faith because you're no threat to them. But if you're someone who's seeking to push back against Sharia law, or you're someone who's seeking to expose Islam as a false religion, then they'll see you as a threat. So it really depends both upon the kind of Muslim we're talking to and the kind of Christian that Muslim is engaging with.
Because you see, if you look at the training side, certainly with those who go and study and become clerics, or those who go through the church, through seminaries and lead churches, I think I read a report many years ago, and I don't think there's been a more recent, about 70% of the seminaries being funded by Deobandi groups. And you realize there's a very aggressive, forceful, specific Islam being pushed and used. And those people seem to be trained not for the battlefield, but for actually taking ground, for actually winning over Britain, where I think often in churches, it's about keeping things ticking over. And there seems to be a very different mentality. Is that the case, that a lot of those who go and study Islam through a seminary and then go to lead their mosque, be involved, have a view of Islam that is very aggressive and forceful?
Yeah, to put it in terms that some Christians might understand, Islam has a dominion theology. Islam seeks to take territory, to take ground, and to take control as a normative understanding of the Islamic faith, that it should dominate. So Muslims who are studying Islam will take hold of that narrative and seek to find ways to advance Islam. They do it through Dawa, which is the equivalent of Christian evangelism. They also do it through economic activity. They do it through the way they organize themselves socially. So they compact themselves geographically so that they become the majorities of areas, so that they can live out their faith, and they, because they have that strength sociologically, they're willing to stand up to a failing liberal elite and to a failing liberal secular humanism. And then by comparison, the church, the Christian community, was basically demoralized and disempowered, let's say, rather than using vernacular metaphors, but they were disempowered by the Enlightenment and have been continuously by the Enlightenment for the last, since about the 1790s and the 1760s, particularly with the American and the French revolutions. And so Christians there's no Christian alive today that understands that Christianity can be civilizational, in the sense of we don't experience that, and most Christians don't know any history. And so lots of Christians, by comparison, see themselves as, being prophetic to society or being charitable to society. And unfortunately, that attitude means that we're giving the game away. We're not even in the game, because we aren't trying to use sociological norms, economic, political realities to mold, shape the debate, the discussion, and the realities on the ground. And until church leaders actually think that there is a battle to be fought and want to fight that battle, things aren't going to get much better for us. Too many church leaders and too many Christians, they want they want a victory that doesn't involve sacrifice. They want a victory that doesn't involve conflict. They want a victory that doesn't involve confrontation. And I want to stress to everyone who listens to this, no such victory exists. You either accept sacrifice, conflict, and confrontation as the process that leads to victory, or you accept defeat. Make your choice. But you can't have a sacrificial-less, conflictless, confrontational-less victory, because it doesn't exist, and there's no path to that.
No, completely. We've had it far too easy, and now it's produced weak leadership.
Yes,
and
we've got weak leadership. You got it.
We're seeing the outcome of that. Islam also seems to be very public in a way that we are in the so-called Christian West told actually faith is a private matter. Islam doesn't seem to have read that script, and they come with their clothing or in the workplace with I need to pray, I need certain food, and on. And it seems to be that Islam is very much outward focused, possibly as well as in, and those displays of, I guess, their faith is there for all to see. Is that one of the issues that we face? And certainly that you see that culture clash, where you wouldn't know if someone is a Christian, but in many areas, certainly London or Birmingham or up in Yorkshire, you would be very sure, oh, they're a Muslim because of often by how they dress. Now, that may be cultural as well as religious, but is that a fair comment?
To some degree, I think that is fair. I think, though, that we need to look at separate out a couple of things. So, for instance, obviously, there isn't a code of dress for Christians, except that dress should be modest and not flaunting. But in a sense, if I was transferred to the Muslim world, they would look at me and say he's dressed like a Christian. And when Muslims who've never been to the West and have not really bothered to learn much about the West see a white woman dressed in a miniskirt and a boob top, they think that that's what Christians dress like. So you've got to understand that some of that, the dress thing is cultural, but and religion and culture interface. And so one of the realities that we face is that Islam has a Pakistani hue to it. It has a Southern Asian feel to it, in the way that it looks and it feels and it sounds to us. And some of that is actually just South Asian culture as opposed to Islam. But Islam definitely, and certainly Islamic culture in Britain certainly does love the idea of the public, and the displays of public faith, to which there is a theological critique. Obviously, it's like, who are you doing this for? But we should also stress that that Christianity doesn't lack that. But Protestants particularly find that difficult, because Protestants particularly have been fully absorbed or more penetrated by liberal culture, and liberal values and liberal ideals. And the churchianity of the Protestant movement has absorbed, Christ's internal teachings that you see in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, about going into your room and praying in private and fasting in private and giving alms in private, so that we're not making public displays. And I think that maybe that was possibly and arguably a misapplication to the Christian faith because of liberalism. Whereas, if you look at Catholic or Orthodox Christians, they're much more comfortable with the idea of public displays of faith, wearing of the cross, saying of the rosaries, going on processions, going on pilgrimages. They also have not forgotten the idea of fasting, which is something we can thank the charismatic church for sort of bursting that back into the Protestant movement, the idea of fasting as a thing. And Christians can express their faith culturally. And one of the easiest ways into that is to live out the Christian calendar, because the Christian calendar is designed to give us a catechism, and teaching. It's just that Christians have gotten out of the habit of it. And so three images are stuck in my mind. One is when you see, Muslims praying en masse on the street and taking over the King's Highway and causing an obstacle. And then, and how the police just stand there and let that happen, and then Christians who are of a Catholic persuasion doing a rosary rally in the street. And everybody knows what they're doing, and everybody's clear about why they're doing it. And it looks very normative, and it looks like everyone's at ease in what they're doing. And then I witnessed a Protestant group who, and I thank them for it. I think it was great that they did it, and went out onto the street and prayed as a group. But you could tell that they weren't used to it, and they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to do Christianity in the public on the street. And so it looked a little performative and a little soy, because they wanted to do public prayer as a public witness, which is fine. Christians can do that. But they weren't used to doing it. They didn't have a culture for it. And I think what, as Christians, we need to rediscover is, what does a Christian culture look like? And how is that different from a liberal culture? Because we're already distinct from a Muslim culture, but how are we distinct from a liberal culture? And if we want to live out our faith, we've got to live it out in distinction to liberalism.
No compare. I remember watching a March for Life rally in London recently, and it was many people there, but the only specific Christian presence I could point my finger at, there was worship. They sung songs on the platform and things, but it was the Catholic groups, and they were together carrying icons, singing, and it must be a local Catholic church, but there was no idea looking in the group where, that's the local C of E, or that's a local Protestant church. You didn't have that. So you're right.
Yeah.
Catholic do seem to be willing to be more public about their faith than certainly the rest of the church.
It's more that they've got a culture.
Yeah.
Whereas Protestant churches don't have a culture, or they have a very shallow culture. Now, I'm not saying that in the sense of that they're shallow people. I'm not trying to suggest that at all. But they don't have a worked out distinctive way of being a collection of humans that is different from other groups. What they are is the same as the liberal culture that surrounds them, with some Christian vocabulary. Like if you look at, for instance, one example to try and illustrate my point, if you look at the Bruderhof have a very distinctive Protestant culture. They've thought deeply about how to live differently to the world around them, to the liberal world around them. And they actually have a very intelligent, sustained critique of the liberal world around them. And so you can spot the Bruderhof. You only have to look at them. They look different. They sound different. They behave differently. You know, they're a distinctive community. And if anything, I would say that they're even beyond the Orthodox and beyond the Catholics in trying to think out, well, what does a Christian culture look like? You know, whereas the Catholics and the Orthodox are leaning on the former Christendoms of the past, whereas the most Protestants have just gone along with liberal culture.
No, and you see that as culture and society have moved away from Christianity, certainly in the West, you see Christians in the church are maybe more confused at now where they fit with society. Where you look at Islamic nations, and maybe some of the changes we've seen here, mass immigration, others probably are conversion. You can touch on that, but Muslims grew up in an Islamic nation and then come here. They're in a culture that they learn it by rote, that they learn possibly out of fear, but everything around them fits into that. The whole culture in every shape and form kind of reflects an Islamic belief in different areas. And then they come here. How is it that we have an Islam in the West that is growing, despite being taken out of, I guess, a cauldron where you believe it because you're told to believe it, but when you're put somewhere, surely that should be questioned? Or is that because we have ghettos? I mean, I'm just trying to understand how, when Muslims have moved over here, why their faith hasn't collapsed whenever they've lost the structures around them. Do you understand where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I think the reason is that the liberal society, and the thing is, we can't separate the church weakness from the rise of liberalism.
Yeah.
And we've just seen that this week with the passing of the euthanasia bill, which is another de-Christianization of a long litany of de-Christianization since the 1700s. And each one of those makes the church weaker. But the thing is, liberal culture, certainly the liberal culture that we grew up in, the one that emerged from the 1960s onwards, is not missionary. You know, it's not missionary like the French Revolution or the American Revolution had a kind of missionary zeal and a missionary purpose to spread the values of the revolution around the world. And so, for instance, you know, when the French colonized Algeria, they Francophiled it, you know, and actually they did a great job in Islamifying the Muslim mind. You know, Muslims now think about nation states rather than caliphates. Well, that's an example of the missionary zeal of the revolutionary mindset, and it succeeded. But modern liberalism, the liberalism that we grew up with, the liberalism that we've known, is not missionary in any way. It is a soft piece of fruit ripe for anyone to bite into it. Doesn't matter whether you're a tiny little fly or whether you're a giant animal. The liberal society is just soft gelatin. And so Muslims, when they came here, they felt no pressure. felt no pressure to integrate. They felt no pressure to conform. They felt no pressure to convert to anything. And by this point, and obviously that happened in the from the 1950s onwards, and the church at this point was already useless. It had been useless for over 100 years. In all of its forms, it was already useless, with the exceptions of, say, like the Pentecostal church, which was the one church that was really going missionary from the early 1900s onwards. But the church in the UK couldn't even convert liberals because it couldn't distinguish itself from liberalism. And so so as more Muslims pour in, they start to consolidate. They've got no pressure to integrate. They got no one trying to convert them to anything. And so they were just able to build their own structures. There was no resistance, And the thing is, people do collectivize. If you go to the Costa del Sol in Spain, English people who often say, well, when you come to a country, you should learn the language and adopt the culture. Well, they don't do that when they go to the Costa del Sol, do they? They want English breakfasts, English pints, and they just want England with a bit of sunshine. And so we don't do it when we go abroad, and people don't do it when they come here. The natural instinct of people is to hold on to what is theirs from the past. And liberal, secular, humanist society has just let them do that. But now we've got a problem because we've let in a group of people who the activists amongst them are wanting to transform this society into an Islamic one.
Let me touch on the church, because the Bible has not changed. The same commands are still there from Jesus to go and make disciples of all nations. That it is all there in black and white. The instructions basically we've been given. This is how you should live, and it's all there. And yet we live in a time where not only Christians, despite having the Bible in our own languages and being able to understand ourselves, but actually the church leaders seem to have walked away from that. And headed up by the Church of England, being utterly woke and fearful. How is that fear, I guess, entered into the church in the West, which seems to be quite different from what we see in seminaries and mosques on the Islam side? Kind of how has that happened? And
it's the cowardice of comfortable people. What we've got is the church is mainly a middle class enterprise, and certainly much of its leadership is middle class. And these middle class people, society, liberal societies worked well for them. They've got something from it, and they live comfortable lives in which the church is a nice project. It's a nice society to build friends. It's a good place to network. It's a nice place to meet other families, and so with that kind of leadership, you're not going to see people being risky or bold or confrontational. The other thing is that the church is so divided that it functions more like a series of social clubs in competition with one another. And so if you're the church leader that's saying, actually, we're going to take on this we're going to take on this other group. Oh, and yes, by the way, there might be some people within that other group that might come into our church and attack us with knives and kill some of us. There's a lot of Christians that are just going, fine, I'm going to find a less radical church. And so what we've got is, because of competing Sunday social clubs, we've got timidity permeating the church. And because they see one another as rivals rather than as the people of God. And that's even before we start talking about the Church of England, which basically just sees itself as a giant national NGO, whose leadership is just run by cultists who believe in the cult of the self. They don't even believe in Jesus. They worship themselves. They worship the self. They worship humanity. God is just something that they move around humanity, and Christ is just something that they move around their true God, which is humanity. And that's pretty much the bishops of the Church of England. And the Catholic churches, they tend to swing between being civic religions and keepers of times and festivals, first communions, baptisms, confirmations, weddings, funerals, and deaths, and then also being NGOs themselves. And so we've got to see this in the long light of history. How did we get into this situation? It's because of the Enlightenment, and it's because of the rise of liberalism. We've got to throw off liberalism. And let me put it in as succinct a way as possible, in the way that we can dig our way out of the situation that we're in. Christians need to be committed to creating a new Christendom. They need to have a vision for a Christian society and think what a Christian society would look like. And then they've got to become activists to create that society that they envision, insofar as they understand the faith and in dialogue with one another, where we prune one another's ideas and cultivate one another's ideas about what that new Christendom should look like. And only when we've got that mindset do we start to carve a new path away from liberalism. But what we'll find is, as we do that, we'll start to become the kind of church that can effectively evangelize Muslims.
How does it fit? Because even Sokol films, Soldiers of Christ Online, and we, talking because I work for Lord Pearson, House of Lord, he often says to me, Jesus never told us to turn the cheek to the devil. And that's a fair comment. But how in the West we are told to, or taught to, accept everything that happens, where we've been taught to move away from public institutions and withdraw. But it's that love your neighbor on one side, and that seems to become to acquiesce, to submit, to bow down, to let them do what they want to do. And yet on the other side, you've got many parts of the Bible, certainly Paul using many military references to how actually you're a soldier of Christ and what that means. How does that fit in? Have we just simply become too soft to understand what it means to push back? Or is it wrong to push back? Should we just sit here as a squidgy, lovey, whatever, and just accept what happens? So, but I think many people or Christians will struggle with, what does it mean to push back on what is happening?
Yeah. So I was just making some notes while you were talking. So I just want to clarify something. I do appear on Sokol Films, but I'm not supported by Sokol Films. I've got my own channel, which is Bob of Speaker's Corner. But Sokol Films films me at Speaker's Corner. And so it's a separate channel, separate thing. We just synergize at the corner. If Lord Pearson had said that to me, I would say, I would warn him of the danger of constructing a theology from silence. Trying to construct a theological or pastoral perspective that is based on something Jesus didn't say is just another way of creating your own theology. We have to build our theology on what Jesus actually commands. And the thing is, Jesus commands us to love your neighbor, to love yourself, to love God, to love your enemies. But he also commands us to love and serve one another. And the thing is, love and service to one another does not mean passivity, apathy, or cowardice. Now, it only takes a moment to reflect upon this to realize what that means. You know, a mother who's walking down a street and sees a pack of ravenous dogs coming charging towards her, or a ravenous dog coming charging towards her, she'll run away. You stick that same mother walking down the street with her child, and that dog is attacking her child, she'll go from someone that would run away from a dog to someone who will fight a dog within a minute, because love motivates her to cast out her fear. and love motivates her to confront the danger. And so love, if we truly are disciples of Christ and followers of his commandments, requires us to confront that which is a danger to the church, because we love one another as a people. We love and serve one another. And so when there is a threat to our brothers and sisters, it is the loving thing to do to protect our brothers and sisters from the threat. So I should be trying to protect you, and you should be trying to protect me. And that means we end up working together to meet the threat to us both. And so you don't get passivity or apathy from Christ's teaching. You've also got the fact that Christ calls us to be a city on a hill. And a city is a group of people. It is a politique. It is an organized mass. It is a society. And this is an image of the church that we as Christians have forgotten. And part of the answer is for us to recover these full images of Christianity, these full images of our identity as Christians, not to try and there's ways that we can think about this. One way is that you try to live them all out at the same time. Another way is that you live out the image that is necessary for your circumstance and condition. Because in some circumstances, you're going to have to be gentle. You're going to have to be passive. You're going to have to be soft. And in other circumstances and conditions, you're going to have to be as hard as iron. You know, and so it's about us recovering all the images that Christ gives us of the church and living them out with confidence. And that's something that liberalism has taken from the church, is confidence. Christians don't actually believe that Christianity is the answer. And you'll know whether you believe Christianity is the answer, because if someone said to you, do you want to see a Christian state and a Christian society and a Christian culture? If you can't answer yes to all those three questions, then you're not confident that Christianity is the answer. Whereas I am. I want to see a new Christendom that has a Christian culture that leads to a Christian society from top to bottom.
I think one of the failures is we're told to choose between love your neighbor and speak truth. And
why are those two different? Who puts those in dichotomy?
Well, exactly. But if we are told speaking truth shows actually you don't care for and love and accept your neighbor. And I think that's part of the problem. And that's been part of the problem, I think, with evangelism, that, leave someone as they are. You have to love them as they are, as opposed to presenting truth, which is the most loving thing you can do. And I think that's been one of the big failures of the church. And that's why the church has got itself into knots on so many issues, because it's afraid of speaking truth in case it offends.
Yeah, I just want to bring in one more point from the last question, and then touch on what you've said. There's one more image that I think is really important to this whole situation, which is that Christ says from John the Baptist until this time, the kingdom of God has suffered violence, and the people of violence clear a way for it by force, or seize it by force. The image there is that as Christians, what we're supposed to do is whatever the obstacle is to the kingdom of God, we're supposed to clear it aside. We're supposed to push through the obstacles to the kingdom of God. And we do that individually, and we do it collectively. This connects into the image about cutting off your hand or you're plucking out your eye if it offends you. But it's also connected to things like, if Sharia law stops us from achieving the kingdom of God, we should sweep Sharia law aside. If the liberal state stops us from achieving the kingdom of God, we should sweep that aside. And that's a much more forceful image, and that sits well with what Christ said when he gave the keys to Peter, and he said that the gates of hell shall not overpower you. Now, the thing is, gates don't attack people. The point is, the image that Christ is using is that the church is supposed to be attacking the gates. That means that the image that Christ uses there is a frontal. It's the idea of the church going on the offensive. And this is the kind of imagery that we as Christians have lost. Now, coming on to your the question about evangelism that you mentioned. The truth is that most Christian congregations aren't doing any evangelism at all. And those that are doing evangelism usually just do the Alpha course. And then what we see are individuals who go out and do evangelism, most of whom, especially the street preachers, are just doing a terrible, terrible, terrible job. And I beg street preachers, stop. Like, we need to be doing evangelism that is appropriate to the culture that we live in. And so that means engaging people in dialogue, using social media, engaging in the cultural and political debate from the Christian perspective on social media, setting up stalls and tables and giving out good Christian books and literature, not silly 12-pence pamphlets that cartoonize the gospel and have a reading age for 10-year-olds, but go out and actually give out proper books and talk to people and build conversations and build relationships and bring them to churches, or maybe even bring them to your Alpha course or to your Christianity Explored course or Ishmael, my brother course, and bring them into a church that has brotherhood and fellowship and has a sense of its own identity. Because what our society is aching for right now is a strong, historically rooted identity. And the church can give them that if it will go and do it. But lots of churches, the vast majority of churches, aren't doing any kind of evangelism at all. Those that are usually use Alpha course, and the ones that are going out on the street are usually doing a terrible job. And we need to address all of those issues for our evangelism to become effective. And that includes a sustained critique of secular liberal humanism and a sustained critique of Islam.
No, completely. Can I ask? I mean, there's a lot of areas we go, but I just want to finish off with your channel and what is available there, because if people go to Twitter, to X, and click on that on your YouTube, then Bob Speaker's Corner will come up, and everything there is available. But it's a fascinating catalog and resource that people can take. And I think people often feel, well, I don't feel confident enough, but you've presented a lot of the conversations, how you engage with questions, how you take apart an argument. So just finish off just on kind of what people will find when they go on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, I would encourage people to go to the YouTube channel, and they might find watching the debates both entertaining and educational. But I also do a lot of live streams where I bring in academics and where I bring in other apologists, polemicists, and I have more in-depth conversations. And my advice to people is, if you want to learn, if you feel that I have anything to teach you, and I make no boast that I do, but if you feel that I have anything of merit, then you can go to the channel, listen to it, with a notepad, take notes on the good points as you're listening, hit that pause button, take your notes and continue. And you can use it like an educational resource like that. I've also released an apologetics app that people can download onto their phone called The Armory. I run discipleship classes and apologetics polemics classes twice a week, on a Monday evening and a Tuesday evening via Zoom. I also run an in-person class in London once a month. I also, I'm willing to go to churches and do training days with churches, consult with churches about how they can do effective evangelism. And are happy to be involved in churches' evangelism as well. I'm also writing a book, but that's some way for getting published. And there's also a blog where you can read that's attached to the YouTube channel. There's a website where you can go to access all these different things, including a blog where you can read articles about stuff. And if you wanted, I'm setting up martial arts classes around the country. So any Christian that wants to get involved in those, they're more than welcome to. It's about martial arts and fitness. And also, we're trying to build a street protest movement called the Disciples of Christ. And if you want to get involved in that, you're more than welcome to reach out as well. Did I cover everything?
It sounds like it. We will put all the links in the description. So however people are watching or if they're listening to the podcast, they can go there and find all those links in the description. So please do make use of them. And it's only by understanding what we believe as Christians and what ways the devil is using to chip away at that confidence. It's only by understanding what we believe then we can actually make a difference. We can be the change that we need so badly in the West to push back against liberalism and be a bulwark against the rise of Islam. So Bob, I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of those resources. Fascinating what you're doing, and thanks so much for giving us your time today.
It was a pleasure, Peter. Peace be with you. God bless, and I'll see you soon.